My world that I want to have a little pride in. My world, and it's not a place I have to hide in. Life's not worth a damn till you can say I am what I am.
First of all, as the 350th Lord Mayor of Dublin, it gives me great pleasure to welcome you here to the Mansion House. You will be treated this afternoon by some afternoon tea, but before that you have to be subjected to a tour by me, so I apologise in advance. There is a great tradition in this house of receiving guests. There was a time it was these gentlemen here, the Lord Lieutenants of Ireland, but today, and for many, many years, it has been the people of Dublin. And it's a great tradition, and you're very welcome to be here. I'm particularly pleased to welcome everybody who's here as part of Winter Pride. I have to say, the Pride Parade was one of the most enjoyable things that I've done so far in my time. It made a big difference sitting and watching the parade as opposed to normally being part of it. I have to say, the claim that it's bigger than St Patrick's Day came to full reality 3.5 hours later as I sat there waving at PricewaterhouseCoopers or whichever other stand went past us. But I think it shows the breadth and depth of acceptance, of acknowledgement, and of appreciation which Pride brings to Dublin. And I hope that Winter Pride at its infancy will develop into a similar opportunity for the city to include. I know we also have a bid in for European Pride, which the guys in Dublin Pride are working very hard on, and I'm delighted to support that as well. So without further ado, what we'll do is ask you to join me in the front hall where the Christmas tree is being put up, and we'll make our way around the house, and we'll come back in here then for some tea afterwards. So the number one tip I would say to you is, as you make your way around, Irish people have a great tradition of when they walk into the room, they stop immediately. And the 40 other people behind them don't get into the room. So I would ask you, as we make our way around, to try and fill each room. It'll make sure everybody gets a chance to come in and see. So on that note, I might actually encourage you just to come in a little bit. So the Christmas tree is taking up a little bit more room. We usually have a little bit more room in here. So this is the oldest freestanding house in Dublin City. It's more than 300 years old, and it's the oldest mansion house in either Britain or Ireland. And the main reason for that was we sort of heard a sniff that London was getting one, and not to be outdone, we made sure we got in there first. Actually, there had been a couple of scandals. The Lord Mayor had been given an allowance of about £500 each year to host receptions and to rent a venue. And they had varying degrees of success with that policy. There was one Lord Mayor who just put all the money in his pocket and he pitched a tent in Stephen's Green and hosted all the receptions there. Another one used the £500 as a deposit to buy a house, to build a house. But of course he'd no money for the rest of the house, and the builder went into bankruptcy and the corporation had to send the builder's family to the United States. So they thought, let's be done with that. We'll buy a house. We bought it for £3,500. And in many ways, if you take the 5-year annual allowance, we've got more than 300 years of value out of the house. So a good purchase. And very much, it was originally a family home. Joshua Dawson was a combination of something you'd never get today. He was a civil servant and a property developer at the same time, and it worked out very well for him, as you can imagine. He laid out the streets here, so Sedan Street, Dawson Street, and then along with the Molesworth Street. He actually managed to make an act of parliament to change the parishes to establish St Anne's Church next door. It's a beautiful church if anybody hasn't been there. It's also the Black Santa is a very Dublin tradition that will happen now in a couple of weeks' time. I had the pleasure of going there with my daughter about 3 weeks ago to attend service, and the problem is you have to sit in the front row. The first two problems with that is if you're at a service where you're not familiar with to stand and sit down, when you have nobody in front of you, it's very difficult. And the second one was clearly nobody had sat in the Lord Mayor's pew for many hundreds of years because it creaked every time I sat down and stood up. This is my favourite room here in the Mansion House, and that's really because it sums up the 300 years in one go. Now, on this wall we have the bookcase from the House of Lords on College Green, from our Parliament in College Green. And before the Act of Union in 1800, Ireland had its own parliament. It was a separate country from Great Britain, although ruled by the King. And this bookcase actually contained many of the Acts of Parliament that were passed by that, and by some of the chieftains of Ireland as well. Its companion actually now sits in Leinster House today and contains many of those Acts of Parliaments that I spoke about. Now, unfortunately, by 1800, by virtue of bribery and corruption and the promise of titles under the British peerage, many of them voted to introduce the Act of Union, and Ireland lost its Parliament. And that sort of connection of the Lord Mayor's office, the Lord Lieutenant, who was the King's representative, and the Irish Parliament and the Irish House of Lords, that system broke up. And with it went the wealth of many of the people who lived here while Parliament sat. And so the city went into real decline. And so emerges probably the greatest Lord Mayor Dublin has ever had, and that is Daniel O'Connell. The first Catholic Lord Mayor in 1841. He was a great champion of what was called Catholic emancipation, but actually it was really about freedom of religion. Because until then, only members of the Church of Ireland could hold a political office. The only members of the Church of Ireland could hold a particular type of property. They could only have their places of worship in certain places. And actually the Church of Ireland celebrated the disestablishment of the church only there last week. So in many ways it was a reformation for that church as much as it was for the state. O'Connell was very proud of that achievement, and he wrote to his friend in the House of Lords and he says, "We're both lords now, but I'm elected by the people." And that's why when anybody asks me have I a problem with the title Lord Mayor, I think if it's good enough for Daniel O'Connell, it's certainly good enough for me. O'Connell also was a great advocate for the abolition of slavery, and he was actually known internationally on that issue. And Frederick Douglass, the great American freed slave, came all the way to Dublin to meet O'Connell. So much admiration he had for O'Connell. In the portrait here, which I'm going to name drop now, Sabina Higgins, the president's wife, reckons we've one of the best portraits of Daniel O'Connell because it shows him in his youth. But in the portrait, you see his little silver cup. And it was given to him by the workers of the Liberties, and they said, "You shall not drink from it until the Act of Union is repealed." That Act of Parliament that lost our Parliament. And of course it never was repealed. And behind the Christmas tree, you'll see the proclamation that was read in 1916 outside the College of Surgeons and outside the GPO. And of course 3 years after that, here in this house, the first Irish Parliament happened. So instead of the TDs travelling to Westminster as they were due to do, in many ways reversing what had happened in 1800, they held the first Parliament here in the building. So a very quick synopsis of the 300 years on 3 walls here in the house. But my favourite little piece is this one in the corner, and it commemorates on Gurta Moor, the Great Irish Famine. 1 million Irish people died and 1 million Irish people forced to emigrate in the space of 6 years. It's a human catastrophe on a different scale that we have never seen in this country since. But the Choctaw Indians, or the First Nation Americans, actually heard about it from an Irishman who was moving them from one reservation to another. And you can imagine him saying, "Look, it's not my fault, I'm only doing my job. You want to see what's happening back in Ireland?" And the Choctaw Nation donated $150 through New York to the appeal for the famine. And it's an amazing acknowledgement, I think, of somewhere that they probably had never heard of Ireland in the whole world, in the whole world. And yet, in many cases, that challenge rests with us now. There are probably places in the world that we have never heard of, and when the shoe was on the other foot, there were people there to help us, and I would like to think that we are here now to help others. So this is the Lady Mayoress's parlour. This is where my wife does nothing all day, does her needlepoint and drinks brandy. Of course, she has a sensible job up the top of the road that we'll all probably go back to when normality hits next year. She jokes actually that she works on Stephen's Green, so she jokes that she's not moving out. She's going to marry the Lord Mayor next year, so she doesn't have to go back to doing the commute. So this is the Lady Mayoress's parlour, and why is it called that? It's called that primarily because of the 4 paintings in the room are selected each year by the Lady Mayoress from the Hugh Lane Gallery. So it's a lovely little tradition. Often they depict either female figures or are by female artists. And the Mansion House is made up of hundreds of those traditions that you really only become aware of when you live here in the house. So this house is where the Georgian ladies would have spent their time. They would have received their guests. It's really beautiful here in the morning, particularly on a bright day when we've all the 4 windows open. It just, the light in the room is really special. It was very much like the way Joshua Dawson had it when he lived here. So you have that diagonal fireplace, you have the carpet matching the plaster rosette in the ceiling, and it's very much used still to this day to receive guests. So you may have officials of the City Council would meet me here. I was meeting the other day just with 2 girls who want to promote Gaelic games among girls, and they were doing a transition year project, and they were here. And on the second day that I was here as Lord Mayor, I greeted the King and Queen of the Netherlands, as you do, which was really interesting because my aunt lives in Amsterdam. She hadn't heard the news about me being Lord Mayor. She was watching the 6 o'clock news and thinking, why is Paul receiving the King and Queen of the Netherlands? And so the house is used at multiple levels, and as you go around, you'll see how that is. For example, at the fireplace there, Nelson Mandela and Mother Teresa stood when they received the freedom of the city. And in this chair, Jim Gavin, somewhat reluctantly, accepted the freedom of the city when I offered to him. Reluctantly in that he was a bit embarrassed, to be honest. He said he couldn't be on the same roll of honour as people like Mother Teresa and Isaac Butt and so on. So, you know, when someone's like that you've made the right decision, that he was that little bit shy about it. And we'll confer that on him in the new year. Usually when I have a group of school kids, I ask them, anybody ever hear of the millennium? And of course they all are very bright. And I go, yeah, it was the year 2000. And I say, no, we had one before that in 1988. Because in 1988, Dublin was having a very difficult time. And so the council, in a creative move, decided sort of to make up a festival. Okay, and we made up what was called the Millennium, or as many Dubliners called it, the Aluminium, exactly, yeah. And it was made up in the sense that it wasn't exactly 988, but it fitted the narrative well, and sure, why let the facts get in the way of a good festival? But behind us here we have a bowl presented to us by Waterford Crystal at the time, and it has 1,000 cuts in the bowl, and it represents the 1,000 years of the city. And it makes you think that the city has been here for 1,000 years, that the Mansion House has been here for 300 years. There's huge history in the roll. Room, or as the Georgians would have called it, the withdrawing room, because you would withdraw here after dinner. Actually, the room was in 3. So there would be partitions here and here. And you most likely would have had a smoking room or a billiard room. The gentlemen would come here after dinner. The ladies would return to their room. And I think the most impressive thing in the room has to be the portraits. Now, you don't have to be a history expert to know the names of Lord Lieutenants of Ireland, although you're probably scratching your heads. We have Westmoreland here, obviously from Westmoreland Street. We have Northumberland from Northumberland Road, and we have Townsend from Townsend Street. It was unveiled by Prince Charles after its restoration. It came here 200 years ago when the round room at the back was built. Now the round room is the room where the first stall was, and we built it specifically for the arrival of George IV because it was deemed that the house was too small. We built it in 6 weeks, so we know it wasn't built by the council because there's no way they could do anything in 6 weeks. This portrait hung right in the centre of it. Now over time it came into the house here. Many Lord Mayors have asked for it to be removed because it's a British monarch. My view on it is, when you leave it there and compare it to the gift we got from the Choctaw Nation, they tell their own story about what's important. And so sometimes history, when it's left there, reminds us of the lessons it wants to tell us rather than the things that the people who initiated them wanted to tell.
Like our letterboxes.
Yes, yeah, exactly. So on the way through to the dining room, there's a very small, you're not allowed on the stairs, by the way. It's interesting I say that because like even the staff that work in the mansion house don't cross the threshold as such. That's upstairs is your home, and downstairs is the office. Yeah, it's funny, but you could go upstairs. You could be doing anything upstairs. You could die upstairs. They wouldn't come up and get you. This is the dining room of the mansion house. It's probably the room that most makes you feel like you live in Downton Abbey. But unfortunately, there isn't a whole bank of Carson and all the gang downstairs. Although it was the subject of a very funny story. On a Sunday, there's no staff here. And so you sort of do feel like, certainly in the first few weeks, you feel like you've been let loose in the museum on your own. And of course on the Sunday, all my aunties and uncles came around to have a go because there was no one here and they didn't want to be let decide down by being too curious in front of everybody. So they all came around on the Sunday. Now we hadn't even moved in, and I said to my wife, Claire, you're going to have to feed them, you know. Now we didn't even have plates at that point, so we just ordered a Chinese takeaway and we all sat around the table here. But I think Christmas dinner here would be very special for my mum. That'd be really nice. But it's a very historic table too. It's not just for Chinese takeaways. So we use it for civic lunches and receptions and things like that. Not often used, which is why I encourage people to take a seat. It is the first table used by the Irish cabinet. So when the Irish Parliament met inside, this table was actually in the drawing room where you were, was the table used for all of the cabinet meetings. So Michael Collins, Amy De Valera, Countess Markovich, Colin Brewer all sat around this table. This table would have had the cabinet papers which founded the court system, which founded the diplomatic service, which established the bonds that were raised in America. The table was used to sign the truce with the British Empire at the end of the War of Independence. And the table was probably the place where the Civil War began because it's where the cabinet split on the treaty when Michael Collins brought it back. So it's a really, really historic table, and sometimes even when I'm repeating it, I can feel the history in the room. It's very special. We've got some more Lord Lieutenants here, which are less interesting than the two gentlemen here. They're former Lord Mayors, and you can see that they're wearing the chain that I'm wearing at the moment, the King William of Orange chain. Now a lot of people ask, how did Lord Mayor of Dublin end up having the King William of Orange chain? Well, we can't give out about King William too much on that front, because the last Catholic mayor, who before William ascended to the British throne, he accidentally packed the chain in his bag when he fled the city. Now he didn't steal it, of course, right? So the corporation were very clever. They appointed a Dutchman as their new Lord Mayor. And of course the Dutchman knew King William, wrote to him and said, any chance of a chain? And again, go back to the ego of the time, the chain arrived back, almost exact replica, but of course at the bottom it had King William of Orange. Now actually the Lord Mayor of Belfast chain, who you might think have had King Billy on it, actually has the Irish words Éire go bragh written on it, and has the crests of the 4 provinces of Ireland. So it shows our history is a little bit more complicated than sometimes we let on. It also sounds like the two lads went out for a few pints and brought the wrong chain home. The portrait here is the only portrait we have of a Lady Mayoress. You can see you start off in colour, and after a year being Lord Mayor you go grey. That's happening slowly. You can see many of my predecessors, former Lord Mayor Niall Ring, Christy Burke, Andrew Montague, Nisha O'Murray, Emer Costello, Catherine Byrne, former Minister, so all of the former Lord Mayors. Now I always warn people at this time, because usually someone says, but what about such and such who's not up here? We only have 20 years of Lord Mayors, so before you give away your age, don't remember somebody that's not up on the wall. Inside you have the crest of the other Lord Mayors, so if there's someone you remember, you'll be able to spot it inside. Now the most interesting character on this wall is this chap here, Anthony Creevy. And so Anthony Creevy was Lord Mayor of Dublin for 3 weeks. The gentleman to his left, Michael Mulcahy, was elected to the Dáil in his 49th week. So there was 3 weeks left in his term. Now, nobody wanted to be Lord Mayor for just 3 weeks because you might never get it again, right? And Dermot Lacey was due to take it 3 weeks later. And so the Fianna Fáil group decided they would just transfer the 3 weeks over to Dermot Lacey and he would have a slightly longer term, which made a lot of sense. So they had the meeting. Now, Anthony Creevy actually had served in the council, but he was due to leave politics. He wasn't very senior in the group and he would have probably never have achieved the position of Lord Mayor. And when Maurice Ahern said to the group, this is what our suggestion is, we just transfer it across, because of course nobody had wanted for 3 weeks. Anthony Creevy looked around the room and he thought, he put his hand up, he says, I'll do it. And somebody else says, great, we'll second you. And he was Lord Mayor of Dublin. Of course, they were all really jealous because during those 3 weeks, Ireland played in the World Cup. And Anthony Creevy was the Lord Mayor that welcomed the Irish team home in the Phoenix Park in front of 100,000 people. And Anthony himself said it was the first time he ever heard, after somebody introduced him as, ladies and gentlemen, the Lord Mayor of Dublin, Anthony Creevy, he could hear 100,000 people saying, who?
What they actually do.
This lady is the subject of a new portrait, and I'll tell you why.
Oh, yeah.
So this is Kathleen Clark.
Yeah.
So Kathleen Clark is the first female Lord Mayor. And there's a couple of things that are interesting about her. First of all, she's not wearing the King William of Orange chain. And she refused to wear it because, of course, her husband, Thomas Clark, a signature in the proclamation, it was so fresh in the mind. It was only 1939, so you can imagine it was still something very raw. The second thing is that she was elected when she ran against Alfie Byrne. She ran against Alfie Byrne, I think, on 7 occasions, and on the final occasion there was actually a draw. And Alfie Byrne, who wasn't running, used his casting vote to elect her after beating her so many times. But the third interesting thing is that she's a Lord Mayor. So obviously Lord is a male title. And so Kathleen Clark wasn't sure, and there's a little article in the Irish Times about it. They weren't sure what to call her. So she didn't want to use the title Lady Mayoress because that in the charter is the partner of the Lord Mayor. So she decided to retain the title of Lord Mayor, which if her husband, Thomas Clark, had been alive, he would have been the first male Lady Mayoress of Dublin. Now you giggle, but actually you've had lots of male Lady Mayoresses in Dublin. You know, Minister Joe Costello was Lady Mayoress. Ken Byrne, Evelyn Byrne's husband, was Lady Mayoress. Creanly Dálaigh asked her brother to serve as Lady Mayoress. And I always think it's funny that we giggle at a man having a woman's title, but not a woman having a man's title. So a long way to go on that one still. But it is another. It's also an example of how we love our little funny traditions. And when somebody put down a motion to protocol that we should change it not to have a male Lady Mayoress, all the council said, no, we want to keep the bit of history. Don't be taking the fun away. And actually, the lads really enjoy the Lady Mayoress's lunch every year. There's nearly as many of them as there is ladies. There was an attempt one year for them to be excluded and just the ladies to come, but I think they gave out. You know?
Well, a huge thank you to Paul, our Lord Mayor, everyone here. Dublin City Council has been one of the biggest supporter financially for Dublin Pride for the last many years, and I think I can say on behalf of all Dublin Pride that in your term as Lord Mayor that you've taken this to a new level. The participation that you had in the parade this year is the first time you've had a Lord Mayor interact so much with Pride, with the Pride Parade. This is something that we're really proud of and we're really appreciative of. I was reminded that when I was going through our files to do my usual shredding recently, I found a letter from yourself 10 years ago, yes, where you'd actually mentioned that your very first official engagement had been to attend the Pride launch. So it's great for us to be here with you. It's also very important that when we're at this 50th anniversary of Pride, that we remember that our community is now aging, where we face a situation which we've never faced before. This is new for us to have older members of the community in such larger numbers, and it's important that be remembered. Dublin itself has the crest to say it's an age-friendly city, and what we want is for Dublin Pride to be able to say the same, that like our city, like Pride, that we're an age-friendly city. So this is hopefully the first of many. So thank you everyone for coming, and thank you.
And you have a whole week of events, Jed.
We have a whole week of events.
Yes.
There's going to be more.
We have a Gaily tomorrow night in Pantibag, because we like to take the west to the east, and we welcome all those from Cork, Belfast and all over, including Dundalk.
Not too welcome.
No, I've got my passport. The north side has come the south side. And we then, of course, have our first Pride in the Workplace conference, which is on in the conference centre. And of course, please, on Saturday, we will be doing a community day in the conference centre, where we're interacting both corporate and community groups together, and a series of workshops and talks that day. But also we are launching our, what most of you will be wondering, the green carnation inside, and you'll be getting one inside, and of course our Lord Mayor is wearing it. It's a symbol of our festival within a festival, and it's to celebrate Oscar Wilde. This year it'll be 119 years since his death, and on Saturday evening at 5 o'clock, if some of you would like to join us, we're going to do a wild walk. So from the conference centre, between 4 and 5 o'clock, we're doing a wild talk with some guest speakers, and we're going to walk from the conference centre over to Merrion Square, which Oscar Wilde's statue is there. But some of you might know is we also have the Pride tree, and over 10 years ago we planted a Pride tree. And a little fun note is it was up to this year the only fruit tree in Merrion Square. And I had the pleasure back then in my early days as chair of events back then, to actually get the tree in place and the plaque. And it's a great honour. 10 years later, we are going over to celebrate Oscar Wilde. And I think that's a celebration of who and what we are, both as a cultural city and also Ireland generally. And that is the Wilde idea. And we're going to then continue for the rest of the weekend with the Wilde Wake to enjoy the rest of the city then.
Without further ado, afternoon tea is served.
It's not a place I have to hide in. Life's not worth a damn till you can say I am.